Hello, and welcome to Good News Rhode Island, the show about Rhode Island and the people and places and events that make Rhode Island a great place to live. All of us know those people, and we hope to have them all here on Good News Rhode Island. Today, we're glad to welcome ARIA members, the Writers Guild of Rhode Island, who are here, Joe Crowley and Colella, who are here for their book to talk about education. The book is Poverty and Despair versus Education and Opportunity. It's an important discussion that we all need to have. Is our educational system out of date and, in a way, not serving our students as they go through preparing for the future, particularly those students who have needs, various economic and social and emotional needs. So I welcome you here this morning. This is an important topic. I'm sure we could talk for hours, and I'll certainly be having you back as we move through the years. But I'd like to start with how you both came to the conclusion that you needed to do something about the educational system in Rhode Island.
Well, the motivation, Juliana, was about 30 years in the making, but I'll briefly describe it. In my professional world, which is as a systems analyst, complemented by 43 years of teaching at various universities, places, his world, Joe's world, and my world came together actually over a monthly card game that we had. But in any event, I talked about systems, which is a broad look at any particular area, and Joe has an outstanding record as an educational consultant. We sort of brought those two together to take a broader look at the educational arena, and that led us to certain conclusions that it's probably not what it really should be, because they've been struggling with it for decades, re-engineering and renovating it, et cetera.
Building different kinds of schools and all kinds of things.
So one experience that sort of brought it to mind is that prior to setting up this book agreement with Joe, this authorship with Joe, I spent 15 years in the South Bronx, the inner city, often called third world equivalent. And there I, as well as 300 other people from Rhode Island, were able to personally experience what it's like to live in a poverty area and all the inequalities that go with that. And there's a whole spectrum of poverty-driven inequalities that affect student performance in the classroom, both academically and social-wise, which is what you refer to.
But you were raised in a family of 9 children, is that right? No, you were. Okay. So you were raised in a family of 9 children, so you knew what it was like to sort of grab your own when you needed to.
Of course. If you grow up, I think you can empathize if you've been there. So in terms of, Ali had his experiences in the South Bronx, and then, we played tennis together too, but he would beat me up over the fact that these children he was encountering in the South Bronx did not have the kinds of education and learning that he thought they should be having. And he kept beating me up about the schools. He said, it's the school's fault, it's the school's fault. So I started bringing some information to him in terms of, well, wait a minute. The poverty conditions create the situation that you see in the schools. The schools don't create it. The poverty situation creates it. There's a vast difference between what you get in education, what you get in testing assessments, between wealthier students and needier students, that's based on what the wealthier students get at home. In one instance, one researcher said the child of 2 professional parents will hear 30 million more words by the time they get to school than will the child of a single welfare mother. Now, when those children are tested, what comes out is that 30 million word advantage that the wealthier child is experiencing. That's where you see the learning gaps between the poorer students and the wealthier students. So very little of it actually has to do with school. It has to do with home.
So it doesn't have as much to do with IQ either.
Oh, no.
Because it's hard to know what anyone's IQ is until they have gone through a little bit of the system. So you've had some changes in your life that help you to feel that you can speak knowledgeably about the poor, the poverty. What is your definition of poverty?
Poverty, okay. Poverty, you know, it's another word for poor. A person that grows up in poverty, economic poverty, is poor in many respects, not only economically, but also poor in independence, poor in dreaming, imagination, poor in living quality. Poverty is a multifunctional word.
Multifaceted.
And in schools, the difference is, do you qualify for free and reduced price lunches? So the federal government determines what the qualifications are to receive free or reduced price lunches, and that's the difference. And that's what, in any kind of assessments, when people are taking a look at different demographics, it's like, is this child receiving free and reduced price lunches? Those are children in poverty. If they're not considered to be in poverty.
Part of the genesis of what our effort is and our recommendation is that because of my experience in the South Bronx, I also authored a book prior to that one called Let's Start with the Children, because I came to understand firsthand the spectrum of disabilities and inequalities these children living in poverty have compared to perhaps when Joe and I grew up. Now, I grew up in Providence in an inner city, but I had a family that provided me with nurturing, advocacy, support, and emphasis on education. Education is the way out of economic poverty, but it's also the road out of many forms of poverty. Mm-hmm. And that is a lifelong disadvantage for that child who doesn't have those factors of advocacy, support, empathy, and they're lost to the world, essentially.
Okay, so an environment for good learning is an environment that has, this is just things I listed, and you can talk about them: nutrition, sleep, secure home, nonviolent home, encouragement from the family, compassion from teachers, and not everyone is a teacher, curricula that is suitable for their age level but also their learning style. A setting for education has to be orderly, quiet, disciplined, clean, with some humor. Community support clearly needs to happen. I mean, the communities need to get behind the schools 200%. Parental support system, the school needs to offer a parental support system. School administration needs to find grants and funds and gifts and volunteers and atmosphere, all kinds of things that the administration has to provide. And then there are the other outside things that influence the school: sports, schools, after learning programs, after school learning, out of school learning. So education is not a blank card. It's not a card that's put into a machine and suddenly it appears for the students. It has to be built, and it's a very complex system that has to be built. And I think that's what you're saying in your book, that there are so many facets to learning and to being able to learn. Your example of millions of words that a child will have heard. For one thing, the single mother is not there. The single mother may be doing 2 or 3 jobs and basically never with her own children. So there are all kinds of social interactions as well, sociological interactions.
Let me put a footnote on that. You just gave an excellent, complete compilation of all those factors that should be there. Now consider that for a child in poverty in the inner city, in rural America, wherever, there's an absence of most of those. For the people who live out of poverty, middle class and above, so to speak, most of those on that list that you gave us is they're there, and that's the big difference. You have families that have all those factors involved. Those are the fortunate ones. Joe and I amongst them. I grew up in a cold water flat by today's standards, economically, I was poor. But I grew up, I was in a rich environment because of all those factors that came from community, family, participation, and responsibilities put on our shoulders. For the children of poverty, most of those items, and you listed about 22 of them, I was counting them as you went along, most of those are absent in the life of a child. You mentioned meals, nutrition, parental guidance. When a child lives in poverty, they don't have those. The stresses, that's an important word that's going to come up in the near future in this discussion. That child in poverty experiences stresses that people out of poverty have no awareness of. Like, am I going to have sneakers to wear to school? What am I going to have for breakfast? Am I going to have breakfast?
Well, let's
It goes on
just
and
talk
on
about
and on.
how stress affects the mind
Yeah.
and development.
The a number of the factors, as Al was pointing out, that you brought out, related to the home, and the stress issue. If you're living in poverty, as Al was mentioning, you have food uncertainty, housing uncertainty. You may be living in a house where there's violence in the house. You may be being abused in any number of ways. All of that creates stress. When a body is under stress, you generate cortisol, which is the body's fight or flight chemical, so that you can respond to the stress, which is good for most of us. But if you're living in poverty, you're constantly being stressed. You're constantly being bathed in cortisol, which actually causes the atrophy of two parts of your brain. It affects the brain's executive function. The executive function takes care of behavior. Do you know how to behave properly? Short-term concentration, and memory. Now, what do you need to learn? You need to be able to behave, concentrate, and remember. And all of those three things are adversely affected by all of this cortisol. So that's a handicap. From my perspective, that is a handicapping condition for children who are living in deep poverty, and it's not addressed as a handicap. The effect of cortisol is roughly the same as lead poisoning. So, that child not only is living in an environment that's not really supportive of education, but is living in an environment that actually is a detriment to that child's ability to learn.
So you consider the kids in Chicago the murder capital of the world, they say. Mm-hmm. I hope it's not. But anyway, so you imagine how they go to school in the morning if they've heard gunshots at night, for example.
Exactly.
Or if they've heard that someone's been picked up from the schoolyard because they shouldn't have been there, whatever it is.
And a lot of them have
factors.
Witnessed people being shot.
Yes. Yeah.
We had a previous discussion at the 4th annual Expo, and one of the people who came by, several of the people who came by, were school administrators, some were teachers. One specific teacher who taught in two different communities on the border between Rhode Island and Connecticut. She said, in Rhode Island, it's a very conventional school. The kids learn, everything is good. It's like the classical, historical classroom of America. But then she goes across the river to a small community in Connecticut where it's poverty-driven, and she said the kids don't come to school prepared to learn to any reasonable extent. And a lot of people say, well, that's the kids' fault that they're misbehaving. The kids are behaving in school as they behave at home, and that's an important thing. Mm-hmm. And these teachers then claim, I would ask the following question: how much of your day is devoted to classroom management? She said, in the Rhode Island school, few percent, maybe maximum of 5%. 95% of the time, I'm teaching, and therefore they are learning. Mm-hmm. I asked that same question when she goes into a low-performing school, economically deprived community. She said, 90% of my time is spent on classroom management, which means she's teaching 10% of the time. And that's sort of a model for what we're talking about.
And that gets into the fact that, if your brain has been impacted to the point where your understanding of behavior is not what we anticipate it's supposed to be. But the interesting thing is that the best antidote to cortisol is nurturing. So apparently one of these schools has provided a very nurturing environment. So when kids go there, they feel very safe. The other school apparently has not taken on that. They're trying to treat the bad behavior. If you don't treat the bad behavior, you just nurture the kids, the behavior itself will resolve itself. But if you keep punishing these kids because they're doing the things that you don't want them to do, then you're going to spend all of your time punishing kids.
I've read recently that meditation instead of detention seems to be helping kids, which is a very interesting concept to me. So as you look at poverty, you have decided that it definitely affects learning ability because of developments in the brain, which is very serious, obviously. It's like Flint, Michigan, and the lead poisoning. So what kind of a school do you envision for Rhode Island in the rural areas, in the suburban areas, in the urban areas that you think would be able to get kids ready for the next century?
Our public schools get kids ready for the next century. They just are not doing, in terms of what's happening with kids in poverty, those kids are not getting the same benefits as more affluent kids are getting.
Is that because of funding to this?
No, it's because of that home situation that's not supportive,
home component.
and there's nothing being done to level the playing field for the less affluent versus the more affluent. What we need to do is to catch up the kids who are living in poverty. Because we still have, our schools are still sending kids to Brown and MIT and Harvard and Yale. So our public schools...
But that's a very small percentage.
But the public schools are not really the issue. The issue is the impact that poverty has on whether or not, one of the quotes in the book is the best road out of poverty is a good education. The biggest roadblock to getting a good education is living in poverty. So it kind of works against itself. So the idea is you need to level the playing field.
So how are we going to do that?
Well, Al wants a pilot program.
Okay.
Now,
for starters.
Let me add a footnote to Joe. Picture the educational arena. Now, add to that model of the arena of education, add in the factor of poverty. Those two have not been put together at all. People talk about poverty. President Johnson created the war on poverty.
And if I can interject there,
Sure.
The last time the learning gaps between the poorer and the richer kids closed was during Johnson's war on poverty. What has happened was President Bush took the education program, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that President Johnson created as part of his war on poverty, and President Bush turned it into No Child Left Behind, which ultimately was an attack on our public schools. He said the schools were at fault rather than poverty. And since then, that's where all of the focus has been. It's been, we need to fix the schools. Well, our contention is you need to fix the conditions that poverty create because the schools are not the issue. There was just the other day, there was an article in the Washington Post that said that all of the efforts that President Obama made in terms of fixing schools, the results were zero. Nothing improved over all of that time. And I'm involved some in the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the testing that's done every 2 years. And between 2003 and 2015, the gap between free and reduced price lunch kids and kids not receiving free and reduced price lunches decreased by 1 point on a 500-point scale over 12 years. So all of the efforts in No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top and all of those things have had virtually zero impact on improving the outcomes for kids who live in poverty because it's not the schools that are the problem. The poverty is what the problem is.
So there's a school in Boston called Trinity School, and it has sort of a day-round program until the kids go to bed. So they come in, they have breakfast, then they have study time, then they go to school, then they have sports and other interest clubs, and then they have support at the school, even dinner sometimes, and school supported homework time in the evening. So that school is providing almost 18-hour-a-day school.
The school is providing a middle-class life for poor kids.
Yes.
That's right.
And so maybe that's the kind of model. We don't have the funding in the state for that kind of school, in my opinion. What can we do?
Okay.
I think parent training may be equally important with children going to school.
2 points. In the world of reality, as we have been talking here, poverty is the root cause of a lack of performance when the kids get into school, starting in preschool all the way up, and then we lose them along the way. The dropout rates are significant. If poverty is the source of the problem, from a systems analysis point of view, which I've often proclaimed over the last 50 years, it's not rocket science. Most of it's common sense. Mm-hmm. If poverty is the problem causing lack of performance, why not go back, look at poverty, and maybe establish a national goal to eliminate poverty, especially the inequalities that are due to poverty, which then roll over into school performance.
So we need housing subsidies, we need child care subsidies, we need
we need another war on poverty instead of a war on the schools.
But not
but you're asking about what can we actually do? Johns Hopkins University did a study a number of years back in Baltimore on the gaps, the learning gaps, and they found that the learning gaps grew most in the summertime.
Yeah.
When the kids were not in school, so it was not a school issue. It was an issue that was, as far as the home is concerned. So Al has been saying, we need a pilot program, and we've been trying to bang it back and forth in terms of how to do it. And you brought up the case of a school that was like 14 hours a day, and we might not be able to do that. One of the thoughts that came to mind was, why don't we create, since the summer is such an issue, why don't we create like a 6-week summer camp school where kids can go and say, in one instance, kids read about farms. Then they're taken to a farm, because a lot of poor kids have never seen a farm. They're taken to a farm, then they go back and they write about the farm. And they may be having math problems associated with farming, acreage and this and that and the other thing, to keep them from regressing during the summertime, so that at that point, they got a better chance. You're leveling the playing field a little bit for those kids, but you're doing it in a 6-week summer program that should be manageable and affordable.
That sounds like a great idea. I think kids grow quite a bit in summer camp.
And there's a good model. And there's a good model for this, Julianne. Over the 15 years we spent in the South Bronx, when we first went there, kids that were in the 2nd, 3rd grade had no vision of what happens after the 3rd grade or the 4th grade, never mind junior high school or middle school. But after many years in the South Bronx, a lot of we opened the eyes and the minds of a lot of children who now wanted to progress into high school, finish, go to college, join the military. They had a different view of life. But we gave them essentially what Joe was talking about, but we did it in a very informal setting. Right?
Well, I think after-school programs can also supplement education, and in a very important way, both with arts and with what we would call fundamental studies as well.
The kinds of things that the middle-class kids are getting that the poorer kids aren't. Things like the art and the music, and a lot of those programs which have been dropped from the school's curriculum to focus on literacy and math. Unfortunately, a lot of those things made kids happy to go to school. The art classes and the music classes, and we've taken it away from them. So they're incentive.
And that's what they can relate to. That's an entry level where they can relate, where they can't relate to a math problem. and they basically zone out,
Yeah, very,
which
very
maybe
quick-
some of us would do as well.
Okay, very quickly, Juliana. It's really a national need. There's a national requirement. We're not saying, do it nationally. We're saying choose
Start.
a pilot program, choose it small. We've talked to people here in Rhode Island. In fact, it was recommended back in 2014 that Rhode Island would be a perfect petri dish for a pilot program. The resources are here in Rhode Island because that program would require teachers, some volunteers, maybe some support from the General Assembly. We've talked to a lot of people.
Okay, did you find a building?
We
Principal?
We have found three schools specifically that would volunteer to be included in the program. So the resources are here. I mean, it doesn't have to be Rhode Island, but the
Well, why not
expertise
Rhode
is-
Island?
Why? That's a good question.
We only have 1 minute.
Okay, one point that I would like to make, it is not the schools that are failing. It is society failing these kids living in poverty. The schools, for the vast majority of kids, are doing reasonably well. They're not doing well for the kids living in poverty, not because of what the schools are doing, but because of what these kids don't have when they go to school. So if you keep thinking you're going to fix it because the schools are failing, you're treating a symptom of the problem, not the problem itself, and you're never going to get it right.
You need really inspired people to do this. I think it would be wonderful if you could find 3 schools and have a model. But I certainly am glad that you came. Al Colella, who wrote this book, along with Joe Crowley, Poverty and Despair, Education and Opportunity. And we hope that we've talked about some of the problems and maybe some of the solutions. Thank you so much, and may you do good work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Joanna, for the opportunity.
Thank you for watching Good News Rhode Island, and we hope that there's good news in the schools right near you, and there's good news around the corner, and that you're helping to make it. Thank you.